Darius Whitfield was 41 years old, and for 4 years he had done the impossible. Every sacrifice a man could make. No vacations, packed lunches, a 7-year-old truck sitting in the driveway of a house he could have upgraded twice over. All of it funneled into a single purpose: paying off his wife Petra's $500,000 business debt. He never complained, never wavered, because that's the kind of man he was. The morning the final wire transfer confirmed, he stopped at a florist on the way home. He wanted to celebrate the woman he'd gone to war for. He came through the side door quietly, flowers in hand, and heard her voice drifting from the sunroom. Warm, loose, laughing in a way he hadn't heard in years. Then he heard the name, Foster. He stepped into the kitchen doorway and waited. When Petra finally saw him standing there, she didn't miss a beat, touched his arm, smiled, and told him Foster was just a friend from her event-planning days. Just a friend. Darius looked at her face, open, warm, completely unguarded, and he knew, in that moment, that he was looking at a lie so practiced it had no edges left. 4 years, $500,000. What he did next, she never saw coming. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The clock in the corner of his laptop screen read 6:47 a.m. Darius Cole Whitfield sat straight in his chair, both feet flat on the floor, and moved his cursor to the confirmation button. He had been in this chair since 6. He'd needed a few minutes before doing it. Not because he was nervous, because he wanted to be awake for it, fully awake, present for the moment the way he had been present for every painful, grinding step that led to it. He clicked. The screen processed for 3 seconds. Then, the confirmation loaded. Wire transfer complete. Amount $23,400. He read it once. He read it again. Then he sat back in his chair and let out a breath that felt like it had been living in his chest for 4 years. The home office was small. That had never bothered him. The desk was a solid oak thing he'd bought second-hand and refinished himself, sanded down to clean wood on a Saturday afternoon 8 years ago. Above it, framed and level, hung his civil engineering license, his professional certifications, and a photograph that he'd positioned slightly higher than the rest. Not on purpose, originally, but he'd never corrected it. The photo showed 2 men at a job site, both in hard hats, both squinting into afternoon sun. The younger one was grinning. The older one had his hand on the younger one's shoulder, and even in the stillness of the photograph, you could feel the weight of that hand, the pride in it. His father had been gone 11 years. Darius still talked to that photograph sometimes, not out loud, but still. On the corner of the desk sat a legal pad, its cover bent back and creased from months of use. He picked it up. 48 pages, 1 page per month, going back 4 years. Each page held the same format: date, payment amount, remaining balance, recorded in his neat, precise handwriting. An engineer's handwriting, controlled and clear. He flipped to the last page and wrote the final entry. October 14th, $23,400. Balance, $0. He set the pad down and looked at it for a moment. 4 years of his life, compressed into a stack of yellow pages. 4 years of packed lunches and deferred vacations and a 7-year-old truck he kept telling himself he'd replace when things loosened up. 4 years of 6 a.m. alarms and late project bids, and passing on the guy's golf weekends because $40 a round felt irresponsible when there was a number to hit. He had hit it. The memory came the way it always did, not announced, just present. Petra at the kitchen table, 3 years into their marriage. It had been a Sunday evening. She was already crying when he came in from the garage, and his first instinct had been alarm. Who died? Who's hurt? Before he understood, it was something else, something quieter, and more complicated. She'd told him about the business in pieces, Hargrove Prestige Events, her luxury event planning company, the one she'd poured herself into before they met, the one she spoke about with a specific kind of tenderness, like it had been a living thing. It was gone, had been gone, technically, for longer than she'd admitted. Vendor contracts she couldn't honor, a business loan that had come due, a lease default on the downtown event space she'd rented because she'd believed, genuinely believed, it was all about to turn a corner. The total debt, just over $500,000. She had wept in a way that made his chest ache. "I know I should have told you sooner. I was so ashamed. I was scared you'd think less of me. I was scared you'd leave." He'd pulled his chair around to her side of the table. He'd taken her hands. He'd told her the same thing he believed then, and had tried to go on believing every day since. "I didn't marry you to leave when things got hard. We'll fix it together." And he had fixed it. Together had come to mean something different from what he'd imagined when he said it. He'd understood that within the first year. When he'd gently, carefully raised the idea of Petra returning to some kind of work, even part-time, just to help them move faster, she'd gone quiet in a way that preceded tears. She'd said the failure had broken something in her confidence, that she wasn't ready, that being pushed felt like being blamed. He had apologized. He had not raised it again. He had simply worked harder, and she had simply let him. And 4 years had passed the way hard years do. One long gray week at a time. He reached for his phone. He opened his messages with Petra. He typed, "Done. Last payment just went through." He set the phone face up on the desk and watched it. 40 seconds later, it buzzed. "Baby, I'm so proud of us." He read it. He read it a second time. Something small and quiet moved through him when he landed on that last word. Us. He held it for a moment. The word, the feeling, the faint, ungenerous question it raised in the back of his mind. He decided he was being uncharitable. He set the phone down, pushed back from the desk, and went to make coffee. The florist on Clement Street had a bucket of sunflowers near the door, and Darius almost went with those. Bright, easy, the kind of flowers that didn't need to mean anything serious. But then he saw the arrangement in the glass case near the register. Deep orange roses mixed with sprigs of something small and white. Warm colors. The kind of thing Petra would hold with both hands and smell before she put them in water. He bought those. He felt good driving home. Not the careful, controlled kind of good he'd been rationing to himself all day. Genuinely, simply good. The loose-shouldered, music-up kind. He let a song play all the way through without changing it. He thought about the restaurant on the east side Petra had mentioned twice in the past month. The one with the low lighting and the short menu. The kind of place that asked you to slow down. He thought about making a reservation from the parking lot before he walked in. He was still thinking about it when he turned onto their street. He pulled into the garage and killed the engine, the side door into the kitchen. That was his door. Had been since the first week they moved in. Job sites were dirty places, and the habit of not tracking that dirt through a front hall was older than the marriage. He came in through the garage. Always. He pushed the door open, flowers in his left hand. The kitchen was quiet and clean. Afternoon light came through the window over the sink, long and golden, the kind that only happened in October. He could smell the faint trace of the candle Petra burned in the afternoons, something with cedar in it. Then he heard her voice from the sunroom, bright, loose. The specific ease of a woman talking to someone she didn't have to perform for. He assumed Naomi. Petra got that particular likeness with her sister, that unguarded laugh that was different from her social one. He moved toward the hallway slowly, not wanting to interrupt, thinking he'd catch her eye through the doorway and hold up the flowers, let the flowers do the talking. He was 3 steps into the kitchen when he heard the name. Foster, stop! A laugh, low and warm. I'm serious. Darius stopped walking. I know. I know it took forever. But it's done now. A pause. He made the last payment this morning. The flowers were still in his hand. He had not moved. No, he has no idea. He never did. Her voice had shifted. Still warm, but quieter. Closer. The voice she used when she was saying the true thing instead of the comfortable thing. Baby, the man spent 4 years paying off your investment and never once questioned the loan documents. You know what that is? That's what happens when somebody trusts you more than they trust themselves. A laugh. Silence on her end while whoever was speaking filled it. Then, what do I feel? A small pause. I feel like we can finally move. Yes, give me 60 days. Darius stood in his own kitchen, in his own house, and became very still. Not the stillness of shock. Something older and quieter than shock. The stillness of a man whose mind had already begun working before his feelings had finished arriving. Your investment. He heard it again inside his head. Flat and factual. The way an engineering measurement sits in the mind. Not a question. A load-bearing fact. He set the flowers on the counter without a sound. He took one step back toward the kitchen entrance. He stood there. He waited. Her footsteps were light across the sunroom floor. He knew their pattern, the unhurried rhythm of a woman who believed she was alone in her house. They moved toward the hallway. When they were close enough, he cleared his throat. Just once. Just enough. Petra came around the corner, and her hand flew to her chest. Baby! She breathed it, half-laugh. I didn't hear you come in. He held up the flowers. He gave her a small, easy smile, the kind that asked nothing. Got off early. Thought we could celebrate. She recovered the way water recovers after you press your hand into it. Fast and total. She crossed to him, kissed him on the cheek, took the flowers from his hand with both of hers. She held them up, made a soft sound, said they were beautiful, said he didn't have to do that. He kept his voice casual, conversational, the tone of a man with nothing on his mind. I thought I heard you on the phone when I came in. Sounded like you were talking to somebody named Foster. She turned toward the sink. She ran the water. She reached under the cabinet for the tall glass vase, the one they'd gotten as a wedding gift, and she set it on the counter and began trimming the stems with a pair of kitchen shears. She did not pause. She did not miss a single beat. Oh, that's just a girlfriend from my event planning days. Foster Lynn, we used to call her. She looked over her shoulder with an easy expression, warm and open. She heard about the last payment and called to congratulate us. She set the vase on the counter. She turned and put her hand on his arm. The touch was light and familiar. The touch of someone who had done it 1,000 times. You hungry? I was thinking I'd make that salmon you like. He looked at her hand. He looked at her face. Wide open. Warm. The face of a woman with nothing to hide. He said, Salmon sounds good. And he went upstairs to change out of his work clothes. Darius sat on the edge of the bed. He had changed out of his work clothes. His shirt was folded over the back of the chair in the corner. His boots were on the mat by the closet door. Everything was where it was supposed to be. He sat, and he did not move. 1 minute passed. 2. The sounds of the kitchen drifted up through the floor. Water running, a cabinet closing, the soft scrape of a pan on the stovetop. Petra moving through the rhythm of dinner. Comfortable, unhurried. He had watched her stand at that sink and lie to his face, and her hands had not shaken. Her voice had not changed. She looked over her shoulder with the exact expression of a woman with nothing to hide. Warm, open, already moving on. And then she'd asked him about salmon. That was not a slip covered. That was not a woman who'd surprised herself and recovered. That was a woman who'd done it so many times the lie didn't cost her anything anymore. He sat with that knowledge the way he would sit with a load calculation that didn't balance. Not panicking. Not yet. Just holding the numbers, letting them be what they were, waiting for the picture to clarify. He stood up. He crossed to the chair where he'd draped his jacket. He reached into the inside pocket and pulled out the narrow legal pad he carried to job sites for field notes. He uncapped a pen. At the top of the page he wrote one word: verify. He looked at it for a moment. Then he folded the pad, put it back in the jacket pocket, hung the jacket on the hook behind the door, and went downstairs. The salmon was good. She'd made it with lemon and capers, the way he liked it, with roasted potatoes on the side and a small green salad. She'd lit the candle in the middle of the table, the short white one they only brought out for occasions. He asked about her day. She told him. A call with a friend. An errand she'd run in the afternoon. A show she'd started watching that she thought he might like. She was easy and warm, the way she always was over dinner, and he listened to every word and watched her face while she talked and gave her the small nods and the right questions at the right moments. He ate his salmon. He refilled her water glass. He did not let her see a single thing. After dinner, he helped clear the table. They watched television for an hour. She fell asleep against his shoulder on the couch at 9:30, the way she sometimes did, and he sat without moving until her breathing deepened and steadied. Then he eased out from under her, turned off the television, and covered her with the blanket from the arm of the couch. He went upstairs to bed alone. He lay in the dark with his eyes open and his hands flat at his sides. Your investment. That was what she'd said to Foster. Not my debt, not the loan, his investment. Meaning Foster had money in it. Meaning the $500,000 Darius had spent 4 years paying back, sacrificing his savings, his sleep, 2 vacations, every financial decision he'd made since 2020, had not simply been the wreckage of a failed business. It had gone somewhere specific, to someone specific. He needed the original loan documents. He'd signed papers 3 years ago. A debt consolidation structure Petra's attorney had drawn up. A stack of pages he'd read carefully, and then signed because the numbers were real and the plan was sound, and he trusted his wife. He'd kept copies. They were in the filing cabinet in his office. He needed to know who QFD Capital, or whatever holding company sat at the top of the debt structure, actually was. He needed to know if Foster was a name he'd find on those documents, or behind them, or both. He knew one person he trusted with this, one person who could pull it apart and put it back together without getting it wrong and without needing more of the story than Darius was ready to give. Craig Odom had been his best friend for 15 years. He was also one of the best forensic accountants Darius had ever met. Craig was the kind of man who could look at a financial document the way Darius looked at a site plan, and see immediately where the structure didn't hold. Darius did not call him that night. He called him the next morning from a parking lot 6 blocks from the house. He left at his usual time. He kissed Petra on the cheek while she was still half asleep, the same way he did every morning. He drove his usual route. Then he turned off 2 blocks early and pulled into the parking lot behind a dry cleaner on Ashford, killed the engine, and dialed Craig's number. Craig picked up on the second ring. Darius didn't explain. He didn't set up what happened or describe what he'd heard or give Craig any more context than what the work required. He spoke the way he spoke on a job site. Flat, precise, nothing wasted. I need you to look at a debt I just paid off for my wife. I need the actual creditor identified, where the money went, and whether the loan documents I signed were legitimate. A beat of quiet. Craig didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask why. He asked one question. How soon? I needed it yesterday, Darius said. Understood, Craig said. Then, send me what you have. Darius said he would. He hung up. He sat in the parking lot for a moment, engine off, hands in his lap, the morning traffic moving quietly past on the street beyond the lot. Then he started the car and drove to work. He was on time. He did his job. He waited. The text came on a Thursday evening. Need you in person. Tonight, if you can. See. That was all. No explanation. Craig wasn't a man who explained through a text what he could explain in a room. Darius replied with one word. Coming. Craig's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, a quiet suite he shared with 2 other independent consultants. By 7:30, the building was mostly empty. The hallway lights were on their overnight dim setting. Darius took the stairs. Craig was at his desk when Darius knocked on the open door. He had his jacket off. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow. There were 3 separate folders spread across the desk and a yellow legal pad covered in his small, tight handwriting off to the side. He looked up when Darius walked in. He didn't say, "Good to see you," or "How you holding up," or any of the things a person might say to soften what was in those folders. He just pulled the nearest one to the center of the desk and slid it across. Darius sat down. He opened it. He read. The debt was not what Petra had described. Darius had believed he was paying off the wreckage of a failed business, overextended vendor contracts, a defaulted lease on a downtown event space, a small business loan that had come due when the revenue dried up. That was the story. That was what she had wept through on their living room couch on a Tuesday night, 3 years into their marriage. The story was not the truth. The primary instrument in the debt structure was a single $340,000 promissory note, not a collection of vendor claims, not a lease default. One note, one creditor, and that creditor was an entity called QFD Capital Ventures. Craig had traced the ownership of QFD Capital Ventures in less than 24 hours. It was owned entirely by one man, Foster Quinn. Darius read the name on the document. He read it again. He turned the page. Craig had kept going. Hargrove Prestige Events, the company Petra had described as her dream, her failure, her deepest shame, had never been solely hers. Foster Quinn had been a majority silent investor from the company's founding. Not a lender who came in after trouble started. A partner from the beginning. From before Darius had ever met Petra. The business collapse was not an accident. The filings Craig had pulled told the story clearly. The company was wound down deliberately. Assets were transferred. Obligations were restructured. The debt, the $340,000 at the center of it, was converted from a business liability into a personal one. Petra's personal one. And then Petra had brought it to Darius. He turned another page. Craig had left the last document for last. It was a copy of the promissory note. The original signed instrument between Petra Hargrove and QFD Capital Ventures. Craig had pulled it from the county recorder's office, where it had been filed as a lien against her personal assets. Darius looked at the signature line. He looked at the date. He read it once. He read it again. The note was signed 3 months before their wedding. 3 months before Petra stood across from him in a church on a Saturday in June and said the words she said, and looked at him the way she looked at him, and placed her hand in his. The debt she had brought to him crying, the thing she had described as the shameful wreck of her past, the failure she hadn't been able to face, the burden she had finally trusted him enough to share, had not been a confession. It had been a delivery. She had walked down the aisle already in this arrangement, already in it with Foster, already knowing exactly what she was bringing into the marriage, and exactly who she intended to hand it to. The whole thing, the tears, the shame, the timing, the way she had let him apologize for pushing her too hard, the 4 years of watching him work while she had lunch with friends, all of it assembled itself in a single moment into one clear shape. He closed the folder. He set his hands flat on the desk and sat with it. The office was quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a vent clicked. Craig did not speak. He understood that Darius needed a moment, and he gave him one without making it a thing. After a while, Darius looked up. "Keep digging," he said. "I want everything on Foster Quinn. Business holdings, active projects, anything with Petra's name attached. Past or present. Any entity, any filing, anything." Craig nodded once. "I'll have it within the week." Darius stood. He picked up the folder. He carried it to his car. He drove straight to Beverly's house. She opened the door before he knocked. She'd seen his headlights in the driveway. She took one look at his face and stepped back to let him in without a word. He sat at her kitchen table, the same table he'd sat at his whole life, with the same yellow curtains on the window above the sink, and the same faint smell of coffee that Beverly's kitchen always held. Morning or evening, winter or summer. He told her everything, 5 minutes, flat and precise, the same way he'd briefed Craig. He didn't editorialize. He didn't let his voice change. He laid it out like a site report. Beverly sat across from him and listened without interrupting once. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet. She looked at him. "What are you going to do?" He looked at his hands on the table, turned them over once, set them back down. "I'm going to make sure that when I'm done, there is nothing left for either of them to hold on to." Beverly held his gaze for a moment. Then she pushed back her chair, walked to the counter, and poured 2 cups of coffee. She set one in front of him. "Then eat first," she said. The next morning, Darius was at his desk by 7:15. He answered emails. He reviewed site specs for a drainage project in the county's East Corridor. He signed off on a subcontractor invoice. He did his job the way he always did it, completely, without shortcuts. But underneath all of it, something else was running. He kept coming back to Naomi. He had known Naomi Hargrove for 6 years, Petra's younger sister, quiet, a little withdrawn around him in a way he had always read as shyness, the natural distance of a younger sibling adjusting to her sister's husband. He had never pushed past it. He had been warm with her at holidays and family dinners, and she had been polite and slightly careful in return, and he had thought nothing of it. He thought something of it now. He left the building at 11:15 and walked to the parking lot 2 blocks east, same lot he had used to call Craig. He sat in his truck with the windows down and pulled out his phone. Naomi answered on the 3rd ring. "Darius?" Her voice had a small catch in it, like she'd been half expecting this call for longer than she wanted to admit. "Hey, Naomi, I need to ask you something in person. I was hoping we could meet." Silence. Not long, 4 or 5 seconds, but he felt the weight in it. "I don't know if I'm not asking you to betray your sister," he said. "I just need you to tell me the truth about something specific, so I can make good decisions going forward. That's all I'm asking." Another pause. Then, quieter. "Okay." They met at a coffee shop called Prentice and Ground, a small independent place off a state highway 40 minutes from the city in either direction. The kind of place neither of them would run into anyone they knew. Brown paper menus, mismatched chairs, the smell of dark roast and something with cinnamon baking in the back. Naomi was already there when he arrived, seated at a corner table with both hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't been drinking from. She looked up when he walked in. She looked the way she always looked around him, careful, but now he could read what was underneath it. It wasn't shyness, it was guilt. He ordered a coffee at the counter, brought it to the table, and sat down across from her. He didn't ease into it. "How long have you known about Foster Quinn?" Her jaw tightened. Her eyes dropped to her mug. Then she took a breath and told him. She had met Foster twice, both times at Petra's apartment, before Darius was ever in the picture. The first time Petra had introduced him as a business contact and moved on quickly. The second time, Foster hadn't been there as a business contact. Naomi had seen it plainly and hadn't said anything because Petra hadn't offered anything, and Naomi had learned early that asking Petra the wrong question earned you a shutdown, not an answer. When the engagement happened, when Petra called her with the news, voice bright and happy. Naomi had asked, directly. She'd said, "What about Foster?" Petra's voice had gone flat and smooth, the way it did when she had already decided something. "Foster is a business contact. You don't know what you're talking about, Naomi." End of conversation. Naomi had let it go. She had told herself Petra had made her choice. She had stood at the wedding in a pale blue dress and watched her sister marry Darius Whitfield, and told herself whatever it had been was over. 8 months ago, she found out it wasn't. She'd been visiting Petra on a Sunday afternoon. Darius was working. Petra had stepped out onto the back patio to take a call and hadn't noticed that the kitchen window was open. Naomi had heard enough to know she'd been wrong about all of it. "I didn't know what to do," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were still tight around the mug. "I kept telling myself it wasn't my place, that I didn't know the full picture." She looked up at him. "I knew the full picture." Darius nodded once. He did not offer her absolution, and he did not offer her blame. He just listened. When she finished, he thanked her. He meant it. He laid 2 bills on the table for the check and pushed his chair back. Naomi said his name. He stopped. "There's one more thing." She set down her mug. "I don't know if it matters, but Foster Quinn has some big development deal he's been trying to close. Mixed-use project, somewhere in the metro area. Petra mentioned it a few months ago. Something about permits or approvals holding things up. County sign-offs he's been waiting on. She made it sound like a lot of money was riding on it." Darius looked at her for a moment. "Thank you, Naomi," he said. He walked out. He sat in the driver's seat of his truck and did not start the engine. A $28 million mixed-use development, stalled in regulatory limbo, waiting on county engineering and planning approvals. Darius had spent 20 years in county infrastructure. He knew the planning office. He knew the engineers. He knew how the approval process worked from the inside. Every checkpoint, every technical requirement, every legitimate question that could be raised by a licensed professional with standing to raise it. He knew exactly what kind of project got held up, and exactly why, and exactly how long that kind of delay could stretch when the underlying documentation had real problems. He started the engine. His expression did not change, but something had just clicked into place. Craig called on a Thursday morning, just after 8. "I've got the full picture. When can you meet?" Darius was sitting in his truck in the firm's parking lot, engine still running. He had not yet gone inside. "Today," he said. "Where?" "Wherever you want." "Beverly's." He texted his aunt from the lot. Then he sent a message to his assistant saying he'd be in by noon. He drove across town with the heat on low and the radio off, both hands on the wheel, watching the road the way he watched everything, completely, without rushing it. Beverly answered the door before he knocked. She had heard his truck in the driveway. Craig was already inside, seated at the kitchen table with a folder closed in front of him and a cup of coffee he hadn't touched yet. He stood when Darius came in, and they shook hands the way men do when the situation is serious, and words aren't the point. Beverly poured Darius a cup without asking. She set the pot back on the burner, looked at the 2 of them at her kitchen table, and walked to her chair in the corner of the room, far enough to give them space, close enough to hear everything. That was Beverly. She didn't leave. She just got out of the way. Craig opened the folder. "Start with Quinn's project," Darius said. Craig nodded and turned the first page toward him. Foster Quinn's flagship development was a $28 million mixed-use residential project in the metro area. Retail on the ground floor, 4 stories of residential above it, underground parking. Craig had pulled the public filings. The project had been sitting in county review for 4 months, stalled on drainage and grading compliance documentation. The site had a complicated subsurface profile, heavy clay soil, a seasonal drainage corridor running along the eastern boundary, and the engineering documents submitted to the county had gaps. Real ones, The kind that a qualified reviewer could legitimately flag and hold. Hard deadline? Darius asked. 60 days, Craig said. Construction financing drawdown. The loan agreement has a milestone clause. If county site approval isn't confirmed by then, the lender can call the commitment. The investors lose their positions. The whole thing collapses. Darius looked at the drainage map Craig had pulled from the public record. He looked at it for a long time. He had spent 20 years reading site plans exactly like this one. He could see the problem without anyone pointing to it. He turned the page. Petra. Craig's expression didn't change. He simply moved to the next section. 2 LLCs, both created by Foster Quinn 18 months ago. Both registered in the state. Both with Petra Whitfield listed as managing consultant. Over the past 2 years, those LLCs had paid Petra a total of $84,000. Darius read the number. He read it again. He set the page down flat on the table and was quiet for a moment. $84,000. While she was telling him her confidence was too broken to go back to work. While he was packing his lunch and skipping vacations and working Saturday mornings to keep the payment schedule on track. She had been collecting a check. She had been listed on corporate filings. She had been working. He turned the page. The third section was the condominium. Foster Quinn had purchased a unit in a luxury downtown building 14 months ago. The interior design contractor for the build-out of that unit had been billed through one of Petra's LLCs. The total billing, $31,000. The utility account on the condo was in Petra's name. Darius closed the folder. He did not slam it. He did not push it away. He simply set his hand flat on top of it and sat with what was in front of him. He had documented fraud, a debt structurally engineered to extract money from him, signed before the wedding, held by Foster Quinn's own company, brought to him as Petra's private shame. He had documented marital financial misconduct, undisclosed income, undisclosed assets, an undisclosed life running parallel to the one she had been performing for 6 years. He had a legitimate professional angle on Foster Quinn's most exposed vulnerability, one that required nothing improper from him, only the exercise of knowledge he had spent 2 decades earning. And he had a clean conscience. He had not yet done a single thing wrong. Beverly spoke from her chair in the corner. Her voice was unhurried. She had clearly been thinking it through, while Craig laid out the pages. "A man who built what you built doesn't tear things down by screaming," she said. "He pulls one thread and watches the whole thing unravel." Darius looked at the folder under his hand. He had identified the thread. He looked up at Craig. "I'll need about 2 more weeks." Craig nodded. He gathered the papers and squared the folder's edges neatly against the table. He had already done what he came to do. He stood, shook Darius's hand again, and Beverly walked him to the door. When she came back to the kitchen, she picked up the coffee pot. "It'll be ready," she said, "whenever you need it." The 2 weeks moved slowly. That was the hardest part. Not the performance. Darius had always been a steady man, and steadiness had never required much effort from him. What cost him was the waiting, the particular weight of knowing everything while showing nothing. Every morning he woke up beside Petra, made coffee, asked about her plans for the day. Every evening he came home, ate dinner, asked how she was. He was warm. He was present. He was exactly who he had always been to her. He just wasn't blind anymore. Petra was good. He had to give her that. She moved through their home with the same ease she always had. Unhurried, comfortable, utterly convincing. But somewhere in the second week, something small shifted. He caught her watching him once from across the kitchen while he stood at the counter going through his mail. When he looked up, she smiled. He smiled back, but he had seen it. The measurement in her eyes. The quiet assessment of a woman who had spent 6 years reading him for signs. She asked him about it one evening after dinner. They were on the back porch, the October air cool enough to notice. She had her hands wrapped around a mug, and she looked over at him with something soft and careful in her expression. "You seem quiet lately," she said. "Is everything okay?" He looked out at the yard. He let the question sit for just a moment, not long enough to alarm her, but long enough to be honest in the only way he was still willing to be. "I've been thinking about the future," he said. "The land, where we're going." The shift was instant, subtle, but instant. The softness in her face recalibrated. She lifted her mug and looked away toward the tree line at the edge of the yard. "We don't have to figure all that out right now," she said. "I know," he said. "I've just been thinking about it." She said something pleasant and vague about timing, about how they had space to make decisions without rushing. She steered the conversation somewhere else entirely within 60 seconds. She was practiced at this. He had always read her deflections as anxiety, leftover fear from the business failure, a woman who had been burned and needed time before she could think about building again. He watched her do it now and understood it for what it actually was. She had never wanted to build anything with him. She had been running out the clock. He let it go, and they sat quietly until the air got too cold, and then they went inside. The work happened in the margins, early mornings in the parking lot, lunch hours in a borrowed conference room at a colleague's firm. He operated like he always had, methodically, without wasted motion. The first call went to the county planning office. He had 2 colleagues there, men who had worked alongside him on infrastructure projects for over a decade, and who respected his read on a site plan without question. He had reviewed the publicly available documentation on Foster Quinn's mixed-use development, and what he found was real. The drainage corridor along the eastern boundary was not adequately addressed. The grading plan had assumptions built into it that the soil survey did not support. These were not manufactured concerns. They were the kind of problems he would have flagged on any project, for any developer, because that was what his license required of him. He put his concerns in writing. He submitted them through proper channels, his name and credentials attached, every word defensible, professional, and precise. The county initiated a formal technical review 3 days later. He was informed as a matter of courtesy. He acknowledged the notification and returned to work. The meeting with Adrienne Muse lasted 90 minutes. She was a compact woman in her mid-50s, with close-cropped natural hair and the particular calm of someone who had seen every variation of what people did to each other inside a marriage, and had stopped being surprised by any of it. She listened to Darius without interrupting. When he finished, she asked 4 specific questions. He answered them. She opened her notepad. The asset restructuring was standard practice, something she had done for dozens of clients in the weeks before a filing. His personal accounts, his land holdings, his professional liability coverage, all of it handled cleanly, through the appropriate legal mechanisms, nothing that could be questioned or reversed. She told him she would be ready to file when he gave the word. He said he would give it within 3 weeks. The last call before everything went into motion went to Craig. Quinn's business partners, Darius said. The 2 with significant capital in his active projects. I want them to have the LLC information, the financial picture, everything they're entitled to as investors. Craig was quiet for a moment. Intermediary? He asked. Clean one, Darius said. Nothing that comes back to me. Just information sophisticated men deserve before they make further commitments. Understood, Craig said. Both men began making calls of their own within the week. On a Tuesday evening, Darius drove to Beverly's house. She opened the door before he knocked, same as always. He stood in her hallway and told her the date, the week he had set, the 3 conversations he had scheduled, the order in which they would happen. She listened to all of it, without speaking. When he finished, she looked at him for a long moment. I'll be there, she said. He nodded. He hugged her once, briefly, the way men do when they don't have the words and don't need them. Then he got back in his truck and drove home. Petra was on the couch when he walked in. The television was on, something soft and familiar in the background. She looked up when he came through the door and smiled at him, and he crossed the room and sat down beside her. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, her breathing easy and slow. He let her. He had 2 weeks left to wait. He had been waiting for 4 years. 2 more weeks was nothing. Darius made the call on a Wednesday morning from the same parking lot he had used for every call that mattered over the past 3 weeks. Foster picked up on the second ring. "Foster, this is Darius Whitfield, Petra's husband." He said it plainly. No warmth, no hostility. "I'd like to meet, just the two of us. No attorneys." A beat of silence. Not long. Foster was too practiced to let silence stretch, but Darius heard the recalibration happening behind it. "Sure," Foster said smoothly. "Of course. I think that's a good idea, actually." They agreed on a coffee shop downtown. Neutral ground. The following morning at 9. Darius arrived at 8:55. He chose a corner table with clear sightlines to the door. He ordered black coffee, set his folder flat on the table in front of him, and waited with his hands folded and his breathing even. He had slept well the night before. That surprised him once, and then it didn't. He had nothing left to brace for. Everything he was about to do, he had already done 100 times in his own mind. Foster walked in at 9:05. He was tall, well-built, wearing a jacket that cost more than Darius's monthly truck payment. He moved through the coffee shop like a man who expected rooms to adjust to him, and they generally did. He spotted Darius and crossed toward him with a wide, easy smile, extending his hand. "Darius, man. Good to finally do this." He gripped Darius's hand and shook it firmly, settling into the chair across from him. "I've heard a lot about you, man. Petra talks about you all the time." He signaled the server without looking at them. He leaned back in his chair, ankle resting on one knee, the particular posture of a man who has never once walked into a room and wondered how it was going to go. Darius let him settle. He let Foster order his coffee, let him make a small comment about the neighborhood, let him take the first sip. He watched Foster's eyes do the quick, quiet work of assessing him, and he watched the assessment land exactly where he expected it to. A working man. Solid. Steady. Not a threat. Then Darius spoke. QFD Capital Ventures. He said it the same way he would read a line item off a site report. The $340,000 promissory note. The 2 LLCs with Petra listed as managing consultant. The $84,000 in payments to her over the past 2 years. A pause. The condominium on Meridian. Utility account in her name. He opened the folder. He slid 3 documents across the table, one at a time, each landing flat and clean in front of Foster. The promissory note was signed 3 months before my wedding. Foster looked at the documents. Something moved behind his eyes. A quick reorganizing, a door closing, another one opening. When he looked back up, his expression was composed, measured. The smile was gone, but the ease remained, worn now like a tool rather than a reflex. "I think there may be some misunderstanding," he said, "about how those business arrangements were structured. These things can look a certain way on paper when the context—" "I'm not here to negotiate," Darius said. His voice was the same as it had been since Foster walked through the door. Level, unhurried. The voice of a man describing something that had already happened. "I'm here to tell you what comes next." He kept his eyes on Foster's face. "My attorney files a civil fraud claim this week. It names QFD Capital Ventures. It enters the public record." Foster's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I have attorneys, Darius. If you're planning to file something, the county technical review on your development project is legitimate." Darius continued, as if Foster hadn't spoken. "The drainage documentation has real problems. I raise them in writing, through proper channels, because my license requires it. I don't control how long that review takes. I don't control your financing deadline. He let that sit for exactly 1 second. Those are fixed realities. The ease in Foster's posture was gone now, not shattered. Men like Foster didn't shatter in coffee shops, but evacuated. What remained was the architecture of composure without the substance of it. Darius picked up the documents from the table. He squared them against his folder and closed it. "I don't want your money," he said. "I want you out of my life and out of anything connected to me. My attorney will be specific about what that requires." He stood, tucked the folder under his arm, and picked up his coffee. "Darius, have a good morning, Foster." He walked out. He was 2 blocks away, key already in his hand, when his phone buzzed in his pocket. Not his number. Craig had set up a secondary line for monitoring purposes, a precaution Darius had agreed to without asking for details. He checked it at the truck. The alert was a single word from Craig. Moving. Foster had called Petra at 9:19. 4 minutes after Darius left the table. Darius put the phone away, started the engine, and drove to Beverly's house to confirm the morning. Darius called Petra at 7:15 in the morning. She picked up on the first ring. That told him something. Foster's call the night before had left her awake. "I need us to sit down together today," he said. "At Beverly's. There are some things I need to say in front of family." A pause, carefully measured. "Family," she repeated. Her voice was soft, controlled. "Darius, whatever you're feeling right now, we can talk at home. Just the 2 of us. I think that's Beverly's. 11 o'clock. He kept his voice even. "I'll see you there." He hung up before she could redirect him again. Petra arrived at 11:03. She had dressed carefully. Not overdressed, that would signal effort, and effort would signal fear. She wore a soft gray sweater and dark jeans, her hair pulled back simply, pearl earrings that Darius had given her for their 3rd anniversary. She looked like a woman who was ready to have a hard conversation and still come out the other side of it. She had spent the morning rebuilding her story from the pieces Foster's panicked call had scattered. It wasn't the story she would have chosen to tell. It was the story that survived. She had rehearsed the shape of it in the bathroom mirror while the shower ran. Foster had leverage over her. She had been trapped long before Darius ever entered her life. She had brought the debt to Darius because she trusted him, because she loved him, because she didn't know another way out. She had been trying to protect him from something uglier. She had made mistakes, yes, but she had chosen him. Didn't that count for something? She believed in the story, the way a person believes in an umbrella. It might not stop everything, but it was something to hold over her head. She knocked once, and Beverly's front door opened immediately. Beverly stepped back and let her in without a word. Petra moved through the short hallway and into the kitchen, and stopped. Naomi was sitting at the table. Something moved behind Petra's eyes, fast. A door swinging open and slamming shut in the same instant. Then it was gone, and her expression was smooth again, and she was pulling out the chair across from her sister and sitting down and folding her hands on the table in front of her. "Naomi," she said. Her voice was warm, careful. "I didn't know you were going to be here." Naomi looked at her and said nothing. Darius was already seated at the head of the table. Beverly stood near the counter, coffee cup in hand. The folder was in front of Darius, closed, both hands resting flat on top of it. He did not look angry. He did not look hurt. He looked like a man who had measured something twice and cut it once, and was about to show you exactly where the line fell. "I'm going to tell you what I know," he said. "I'm not going to ask you to explain it. I'm just going to say it out loud so that everyone in this room has the same information." Petra opened her mouth. "Please, let me finish." She closed it. He opened the folder. "Your business debt was held primarily by a company called QFD Capital Ventures." He placed the first document on the table. QFD Capital Ventures is owned by Foster Quinn. I spent 4 years paying Foster Quinn. He placed the second document down. Foster was a majority silent investor in Hargrove Prestige Events from the beginning. Before we were married, the business collapse was controlled. The debt was restructured into a personal obligation, and you brought it to me. He placed the third document on top of the others, the promissory note, her signature at the bottom, the date printed clearly above it. This was signed 3 months before our wedding. The kitchen was very quiet. Petra looked at the document. Then she looked up, and her eyes filled, and her voice, when it came, was soft and fractured in exactly the right places. "You don't understand what he had over me," she said. "I was trapped. Before you, I was already in it, and I didn't know how to get out. And when I met you—" She stopped, pressed her fingers to her lips. "I was trying to protect you from how bad it actually was. I was scared if you knew the whole truth, you'd leave. And I—" Her voice broke cleanly. "I loved you. I love you. I made mistakes, but I chose you." Darius let her finish. Then he said, "You signed this 3 months before you accepted my proposal. Foster had leverage over me. There is a document with your signature on it," he said, "dated to a time when you were already planning to walk down the aisle. You looked me in the face on that day and made vows to me while this was already running." Petra turned to Naomi. Something urgent moved into her expression, a reaching. "Naomi," her voice shifted, older sister, the one who had always held the authority in that relationship, calling it in like a debt. "You know me. Tell him who I am. Tell him this isn't—" Naomi looked up from the table. "I knew about Foster before you were engaged." Her voice was quiet, but it did not waver. "I asked you about him. You told me I didn't know what I was talking about." She turned and looked directly at Darius. "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. I should have." Petra's composure cracked, not into grief, into something harder. "So that's what this is." Her voice climbed. She looked at Darius. "You brought my own sister here to ambush me. You went behind my back and you—" Beverly set her coffee cup down on the counter. "Girl." Her voice was quiet and absolute. "He paid $500,000 for your lies." A pause, short and final. "Lower your voice in this house." The room went still. Darius looked at his wife across the table. "My attorney files this week," he said. "The divorce filing triggers mandatory financial disclosure. The fraud claim enters public record. QFD Capital Ventures is named. The asset review will include the LLC payments, the consulting income, the condo, all of it." He kept his voice flat and even, the same voice he used to read a structural report. "Her contact information is in your email from my attorney. My accounts have already been moved." He closed the folder. "I spent 4 years believing you were ashamed of what happened to that business," he said. "I worked extra hours because I thought you were healing. I apologized for asking you to help. I packed my lunch every day for 4 years." He looked at her. "You weren't ashamed. You were waiting." He stood. He looked at Beverly. A long, quiet look, the kind that carries more than words, and said simply, "Thank you." He picked up the folder, pushed his chair in, and walked out of Beverly's kitchen. He did not look back at Petra. The divorce filing dropped on a Tuesday. The civil fraud claim, QFD Capital Ventures named by name, entered public record 2 days later, on a Thursday morning, quiet as a stone dropping into still water. Petra retained an attorney by Friday afternoon. It didn't matter. The documents existed. The payments existed. The timeline existed. Her attorney was competent and professional, and told her, in the careful language attorneys use when the news is bad, that the evidentiary position was difficult. Difficult meant untenable. Petra understood the translation. 3 weeks after the filing, she moved into Foster's downtown condo. She packed 2 suitcases and a box of things from the kitchen. Her good knives, the French press, the small ceramic bowl she'd bought at a market in Savannah on a trip she and Darius had taken in the second year of their marriage. She stood in the bedroom doorway for a moment before she left. The room looked the same as it always had. Darius had not rearranged anything. She picked up her bags and walked out. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They arrived the way a foundation shifts, quietly, structurally, each small movement invisible until the cumulative weight made the whole thing uninhabitable. The county technical review on Foster's development project extended past the financing deadline. The construction loan lapsed. The investors, two of whom had been asking pointed questions for weeks, ever since certain financial information had reached them through a careful intermediary, withdrew their commitments and retained their own attorneys to examine the Quinn partnership agreements. They found irregularities. They kept looking. They found more. A municipal contracting office, running a routine background check after the fraud filing became public record, quietly awarded a separate infrastructure contract to another firm. No announcement, no explanation. The contract simply went elsewhere. Foster's name was not mentioned. It didn't need to be. Didn't. A woman named Gloria Reyes, who had owned a catering company and had been owed $60,000 when Hargrove Prestige Events dissolved, saw the public filing on a Thursday evening while sitting at her kitchen table. She had spent 3 years believing the money was simply gone, that businesses failed, and sometimes you were the one left holding the loss. She called an attorney the following morning. 2 additional former vendors, seeing her filing referenced in a local business newsletter, contacted attorneys of their own within the month. Foster Quinn did not collapse in a single day. His name did not appear in headlines. There was no dramatic moment of public reckoning. What happened was quieter and more permanent than that. Phone calls stopped being returned. Introductions stopped being made. Men who had once been glad to be seen having lunch with Foster Quinn began finding reasons to be elsewhere. His professional network, the thing he had spent 20 years building, the thing that was, in the end, his only real asset, contracted steadily over the following year. One closed door at a time, each one shut without a sound. Petra, living in the condo with a man whose warmth had always been contingent on her usefulness, learned something she had not accounted for in 6 years of planning. Foster, under financial pressure, was not the Foster she had imagined from inside a funded marriage. He was precise about money in ways that felt like accusation. He was distracted in ways that felt like absence. The easy generosity that had made him feel like rescue was gone, replaced by a man who tracked shared expenses in a spreadsheet and went quiet for long stretches in the evenings, staring at his phone. The tenderness she had held in her mind like a promise, the version of him that existed when Darius was the one keeping the lights on, did not survive the new conditions. What they had now was not desire. It was shared liability, a common exposure they could not escape separately, so they did not escape it together. The exit plan she had spent 6 years building, the life she had positioned and waited and lied for, it delivered her to exactly the place she had feared when she first walked into Darius's life with $500,000 of debt and a practiced look of shame, dependent, diminished, without the one person who had ever actually kept his word to her. 18 months after the filing, Darius broke ground on his land, 32 acres outside the city, the same plot he had owned for years, the same land Petra had deflected every time he raised it. He had designed the house himself, practical and warm, a covered porch facing east so the morning light would hit it first. He hired a contractor he had worked alongside for 15 years. He did not rush the design. He got it right. The previous summer, he had taken 2 weeks off work. The first real vacation he'd allowed himself in 5 years. He and Craig and Beverly drove through 3 states, eating at diners, sleeping late, not planning much. His friends said he looked, somewhere around day 4, like a man who had put something very heavy down and was only just now feeling the absence of the weight. He looked, Beverly said privately to Craig over breakfast, in a roadside diner in eastern Tennessee, like his father. On a clear morning in November, Beverly walked the staked and flagged foundation beside him. The ground was marked out in orange flags, the outline of the house visible in the soil like a blueprint made real. Beverly moved slowly, looking at it, taking in the shape of it. The morning was cool and bright. Their breath showed faintly in the air. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Your father would have been here for this." "I know," Darius said. She took his arm, held it the way she had held it at his father's funeral, firm and unhurried. "He raised a man who kept his word," she said, "even when it cost him." Darius looked at the staked ground. The flags moved slightly in the morning breeze. "Keeping my word to her cost me," he said. "Keeping my word to myself is going to build something." Beverly patted his arm once, solid, final. "Then, let's build it." Darius set down his thermos, unrolled the blueprints, and smoothed them flat with both hands. The morning was clear, 32 acres beneath his feet. Nothing left to pay that wasn't freely owed. He got to work. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.